The massive doors of the Valerian royal throne room opened with a deep, thunderous sound that echoed through the crystalline chamber. Princess Nera walked forward with confident steps, her tall form moving gracefully across the polished floor that reflected the light from 1,000 glowing crystals embedded in the walls. Behind her, much smaller and seemingly fragile, walked Ben Torres. Ben had never seen anything like the throne room before. The ceiling stretched high above them, carved from pure crystal that sparkled like captured starlight. Pillars of the same material rose from the floor, each one thick enough that 10 humans holding hands could not wrap around it. The air hummed with energy from the crystals, creating a low, musical tone that seemed to vibrate through his bones. But what made Ben's breath catch in his throat was not the beauty of the room. It was the sight of the Valerian nobles who filled the space on either side of the walkway that led to the throne. Each one stood at least 12 feet tall, their bodies covered in natural armor that looked like polished stone. Their skin had a chitinous quality, with plates that overlapped like the scales of some ancient dragon. Their eyes glowed with an inner light, and when they moved, Ben could hear the soft clicking sound of their armor plates shifting against each other. At the far end of the room, on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, sat Queen Vega. She was even more impressive than her subjects, her armor-like skin a deep blue-black color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her 4 eyes, arranged in 2 pairs, focused on the approaching figures with an intensity that made Ben feel as though she could see right through him. Princess Nera had prepared Ben for this moment during their journey to the Valerian home world, but nothing could have truly readied him for the reality of standing before the most powerful ruler in this sector of the galaxy. She had told him about her people's culture, their values, and their deep belief that physical strength determined worth. She had warned him that many would see him as weak, as unworthy of even standing in the same room as Valerian royalty. As they walked, Ben could hear the whispers starting among the nobles. The sounds were not quite like human speech, but his translator device picked up the meanings and fed them directly into his mind. Is that really a human? So small and soft-looking. What is Princess Nera thinking? Surely this is some kind of joke. Ben kept his eyes forward, focusing on Princess Nera's back. She had not turned to look at him since they entered, but he knew she could hear the whispers too. Her shoulders remained straight, her head held high. She was proud of her choice, even if no one else understood it yet. When they reached the base of the throne, Princess Nera stopped and performed the traditional Valerian salute. She placed her right fist over her heart and lowered her head briefly. Ben had practiced this gesture many times during their journey, and he copied it as perfectly as he could manage. Queen Vega's 4 eyes moved from her daughter to Ben, studying him for a long moment that felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice filled the entire chamber. It was deep and resonant, carrying easily to every corner of the vast room. "My daughter," Queen Vega said, her tone formal and measured, "you have returned from your diplomatic mission to the human home world. We expected you to bring news of trade agreements and military cooperation. Instead, you bring this small creature before our throne. Explain yourself." Princess Nera raised her head and looked directly at her mother. "Great Queen, honored mother, I have indeed completed my diplomatic mission. The trade agreements have been signed, and the humans have agreed to share their technological innovations with our empire. But I have also made a personal choice that I wish to announce before the court." The whispers among the nobles grew louder. Queen Vega raised one massive hand, and immediate silence fell over the room. "Speak," the queen commanded. "I have chosen this human, Ben Torres, to be my husband and partner in life," Princess Nera announced, her voice carrying clearly through the crystal chamber. The silence that followed was so complete that Ben could hear his own heartbeat. He felt hundreds of eyes upon him, studying him, judging him. Some of the nobles made sounds that his translator interpreted as laughter, though it sounded more like rocks grinding together. Queen Vega leaned forward on her throne, her 4 eyes narrowing as she focused entirely on Ben. "You," she said, pointing one finger that was as thick as Ben's wrist, "you are the human my daughter claims to want as a mate?" Ben swallowed hard but managed to keep his voice steady when he replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." I am Ben Torres, and I love Princess Nira with all my heart. More of that grinding laughter from the nobles. One of them, a massive Valerian with scarred armor plating, stepped forward slightly. Your Majesty, the noble said, surely the princess speaks in jest. This creature could not even survive a single blow from a Valerian child, much less serve as a mate to our most honored princess. Queen Vega held up her hand again, silencing the noble, but her expression suggested she agreed with the sentiment. She turned her attention to her daughter. Nira, she said, and her voice carried a note of disappointment, you are my only child, heir to the throne of the greatest empire in this galaxy. You could have your choice of the mightiest warriors from a dozen worlds. The Crown Prince of the Corinthian Federation has requested your hand. The war champion of the Draconis system has offered to undergo any trial to prove his worth. Even the Emperor of the Stellar Dominion has sent ambassadors asking about a marriage alliance. And yet you choose this soft, weak creature who possesses none of the strength that our people value? Princess Nira's back straightened even more, if that was possible. Ben could see the muscles in her neck tighten as she prepared to defend her choice. Mother, she said, I understand that Ben does not appear strong by our traditional measures. But during my time on Earth, I witnessed a strength in humans that surpasses anything I have seen among our own people or any other race. What strength could such a fragile being possibly possess? Queen Vega asked, genuine curiosity mixing with skepticism in her voice. Princess Nira turned slightly, gesturing toward Ben. When I first met Ben, there had been an accident at a space station orbiting Earth. The station's main support structure had failed, and hundreds of beings from various worlds were trapped inside. The station was breaking apart, and rescue teams had only hours before it would be completely destroyed. The throne room had fallen silent again as the nobles listened to the story. Our own rescue protocols would have called for extracting the strongest first, saving as many as possible through rapid, direct action, Princess Nira continued. But Ben and his human team approached the problem differently. While other rescue ships focused on pulling survivors from the wreckage, Ben analyzed the station's structural weaknesses. He designed a series of temporary supports using materials from the rescue ships themselves. Then he coordinated a rescue effort that saved not just the strong, but also the weak, the injured, and the very young. Queen Vega's expression had shifted from skepticism to interest. Continue, she said. By the time the rescue was complete, Ben's innovations had saved nearly twice as many lives as our own estimates suggested was possible. But what impressed me most was not his technical skill, though that was considerable. It was his refusal to abandon anyone. When other rescuers said that certain areas of the station were too dangerous to reach, Ben found ways to reach them safely. When resources ran low, he found ways to make them stretch further. He never once suggested leaving the weakest behind to save the strong. Ben felt his face growing warm with embarrassment at the praise, but he remained silent. This was Princess Nira's moment to speak, and he would not interrupt. That rescue showed me something about humans that I had never understood before, Princess Nira said, looking directly at her mother. They do not measure strength the way we do. For them, true strength is not about how much weight you can lift or how many enemies you can defeat in battle. True strength is about how many others you can lift up, how many problems you can solve, and how much good you can create in the universe. Queen Vega was quiet for a long moment, considering her daughter's words. Around the throne room, the nobles waited to hear their queen's response. Finally, Queen Vega spoke. These are beautiful words, my daughter, and perhaps there is wisdom in what you say about different kinds of strength. But our people have survived for thousands of years by honoring the strength of body and will that has made us the greatest empire in this sector of space. If this human wishes to join our royal family, he must prove that he possesses the strength worthy of a Valerian princess, regardless of how that strength manifests. Ben felt his heart rate increase. He had known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Queen Vega's 4 eyes fixed on him again. Human, she said, do you understand what I am saying? Yes, Your Majesty, Ben replied. You are saying that I must prove myself worthy according to Valerian customs and traditions. Indeed, Queen Vega said. And do you know what that means? Ben took a deep breath. He had studied Valerian culture during the journey to their world. He knew exactly what the Queen was asking. It means I must undergo the trials of worth, he said clearly, his voice carrying through the crystal chamber. The reaction was immediate. The grinding laughter of the nobles filled the air, louder and more sustained than before. Several of them appeared to be having trouble controlling their amusement. The trials of worth, Queen Vega repeated, a note of amazement in her voice. You understand that these trials were designed by and for Valorians? That they test physical strength, combat ability, and leadership skills that your species has never needed to develop? I understand, Your Majesty, Ben said. You understand that no alien has ever attempted these trials, much less completed them successfully? I understand that as well, Your Majesty. Queen Vega leaned back in her throne, studying Ben with what might have been the beginning of respect. And yet you still wish to attempt them? Ben looked briefly at Princess Nira, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Then he looked back at Queen Vega. Your Majesty, he said, I love Princess Nira more than my own life. If proving myself worthy of her requires facing these trials, then I will face them. I may not succeed, but I will not fail for lack of trying. For the first time since Ben had entered the throne room, Queen Vega smiled. The next morning, Ben stood at the entrance to the great arena of trials. The massive stone structure had been built thousands of years ago, carved directly into the side of a mountain. Its walls rose high above him, covered with symbols and markings that told the stories of every Valerian who had ever attempted the trials of worth. Most of those stories ended in victory. Some ended in honorable defeat. A few ended in death. Princess Nira walked beside him as they approached the arena gates. She had spent the entire night explaining each trial to him, helping him understand what he would face. But they both knew that understanding and succeeding were very different things. Ben, she said quietly, you do not have to do this. We could leave this world together. There are places in the galaxy where we could build a life without needing my mother's approval. Ben shook his head. No, Nira. I want to marry you the right way, with your family's blessing and your people's respect. Besides, I think your mother is testing more than just my strength. She wants to understand humans better, and this is her way of learning. The arena gates opened before them, revealing a circular space larger than any stadium Ben had ever seen on Earth. The floor was covered in fine sand that sparkled with tiny crystals. Around the edges, rising in terraced levels, sat thousands of Valerian spectators. Word of the human attempting the trials had spread quickly across the capital city, and it seemed like half the population had come to watch. In the royal viewing box, Queen Vega sat with her advisors and the most important nobles of the court. Her 4 eyes were fixed on Ben as he entered the arena. Next to her sat the trial master, an ancient Valerian whose armor plating had turned white with age. He had overseen these trials for more centuries than Ben could imagine. At the center of the arena waited the first challenge. The sacred boulder was a massive piece of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. According to Valerian tradition, it had fallen from the sky during the early days of their civilization, and moving it had become the first test of worthiness for anyone seeking to prove their strength. The boulder stood nearly 8 feet tall and was almost perfectly round. Ben estimated it weighed at least 5 tons. Around the arena, he could see Valerian spectators pointing at him and making those grinding sounds that served as laughter among their people. To them, the sight of a human attempting to move something so massive must have seemed ridiculous. The trial master's voice echoed across the arena through hidden amplifiers. First trial of worth, he announced. The sacred boulder must be moved from its current position to the marked circle on the opposite side of the arena. The trial begins now. Ben walked slowly around the boulder, studying it from every angle. The smooth surface offered no handholds, and even if it did, he knew he could never lift something so heavy with raw muscle power alone. But Princess Nera had taught him that Valerian trials were not just tests of strength. They were also tests of worthiness, and worthiness could be demonstrated in many ways. He looked around the arena floor and spotted what he was looking for. Near the edge of the space, maintenance crews had left various tools and materials used for preparing the arena between trials. Ben jogged over and began examining what was available. There were several long metal poles used for smoothing the sand. There were wooden beams that served as barriers. There were coils of strong rope. And there were several large wooden wedges used for various construction tasks around the arena. Ben began carrying these materials back to the boulder. The Valerian spectators watched with growing curiosity as he arranged the items in what seemed like a random pattern around the massive stone. "What is he doing?" Ben heard one noble ask another. "Perhaps he has given up and is building something to sit on while he waits for the trial to end," came the reply, followed by more grinding laughter. But Ben was not giving up. He was applying principles of physics that humans had been using for thousands of years. He positioned one of the wooden beams on the ground next to the boulder and placed one of the wedges underneath it, creating a lever arm. Then he tied several of the ropes to the boulder, threading them through a system of pulleys that he constructed using the metal poles and more wooden pieces. The arena had grown quieter as spectators realized that Ben was building something complex and purposeful. Even Queen Vega leaned forward in her seat, watching with increased interest. Ben tested his construction carefully, making sure each component was secure. Then he positioned himself at the end of his lever system and began to pull. At first, nothing happened. The boulder remained motionless, and Ben could hear disappointed murmurs from the crowd. But he adjusted his position, checked his rope system, and tried again. This time, the massive stone shifted slightly. A gasp went up from the Valerian spectators. Ben paused, wiped sweat from his forehead, and pulled again with all his strength. The sacred boulder began to move across the sand, leaving a deep furrow behind it. Ben had to stop several times to adjust his lever system and reposition his pulleys, but each time he resumed pulling, the boulder moved a little farther. The arena had fallen completely silent except for the sound of the stone grinding across the crystalline sand. Even the nobles in the royal box had stopped their conversations to watch. It took Ben nearly an hour, but finally, he managed to move the sacred boulder into the marked circle on the opposite side of the arena. As the stone settled into its new position, Ben collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily from the effort. The silence continued for several more seconds. Then, slowly, a sound began to build from the Valerian spectators. It was not the grinding laughter Ben had heard before. It was something else entirely. It took him a moment to realize that they were applauding. The trial master's voice echoed across the arena again. First trial of worth completed successfully. The human Ben Torres has moved the sacred boulder using methods not previously seen in this arena, but the trial has been completed according to its requirements. Ben stood up slowly, still catching his breath. He looked up at the royal box and saw Queen Vega watching him with an expression he could not quite read. She gave him a single nod, which he took as acknowledgement of his success. But there was no time to rest. The second trial was already being prepared. Arena workers quickly moved Ben's lever system out of the way and began raking the sand smooth again. From gates at the far end of the arena came a sound that made Ben's blood run cold. It was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The Korthax beast emerged from the shadows of the tunnel entrance, and Ben understood why this creature had been chosen to test Valerian warriors. It stood nearly as tall as a Valerian, but its body was built for pure predatory power. Its hide was covered in natural armor plates that overlapped like chain mail. Its 4 legs ended in claws that could tear through metal, and its long tail whipped back and forth with obvious strength. But what drew Ben's attention most were the creature's eyes. They glowed with an intelligence that told him this was not just a mindless animal. This was a thinking predator. The trial master's voice filled the arena once more. Second trial of worth. The Korthax beast must be defeated in single combat. No weapons are permitted beyond what the challenger can create from materials present in the arena. The trial begins now. The beast turned its glowing eyes toward Ben and began moving in his direction. It did not charge immediately. Instead, it began to circle him, studying him the way a cat might study a mouse before pouncing. Ben forced himself to remain calm and think clearly. He had no chance of matching this creature's physical strength or natural weapons. But he had something the beast did not have. He had the ability to use tools and strategy. As the Korthax continued circling, Ben began moving toward the arena walls, keeping his eyes on the creature but also scanning the environment for anything he could use to his advantage. The arena was mostly empty sand, but there were the crystal-studded walls, the gates where the beast had entered, and the maintenance areas where workers stored equipment. The beast's patience ran out, and it charged. Ben dove to one side, rolling across the sand as massive claws swept through the space where he had been standing. He came up running, heading for the arena wall where he had spotted something useful. Built into the wall at regular intervals were drainage channels designed to carry away water when the arena was cleaned. The channels were narrow, too narrow for the Korthax to follow, but wide enough for a human. As the beast turned and charged again, Ben leaped into one of the drainage channels. The creature's claws scraped against the stone walls as it tried to reach him, but the channel was too deep and narrow for its massive frame. Ben crawled quickly through the drainage system, emerging from another channel on the opposite side of the arena. The beast spun around, confused and growing angry. This was not how its battles usually went. For the next several minutes, Ben led the creature on a chase around the arena, using every advantage the environment provided. He ducked behind the few barriers that remained from arena maintenance. He used the drainage channels to move quickly from one side to another. He even climbed partway up the arena walls using handholds created by the decorative crystal formations. The Valerian spectators watched in fascination. They had never seen a trial conducted this way. Usually, challengers faced the Korthax in direct combat, using strength and warrior skills to overcome the beast. Ben was doing something entirely different. But Ben knew he could not run forever. Eventually, the beast would corner him, or he would make a mistake. He needed to find a way to defeat the creature, not just avoid it. As the Korthax charged again, Ben noticed something important. The beast's momentum carried it forward even when it tried to stop or change direction. Its massive size and weight made it difficult to maneuver quickly. Ben began implementing a new strategy. Instead of just running away, he started leading the creature toward specific targets. He would position himself in front of one of the stone pillars that supported the arena's upper levels, then dodge aside at the last second. The beast, unable to stop its charge, would crash into the pillar. After the third such collision, the Korthax was moving more slowly and shaking its massive head as if dazed. Ben could see that the creature was hurt, though not seriously. It was then that Ben made a decision that surprised everyone in the arena, including himself. Instead of continuing to use the beast's momentum against it, he stopped running. The Korthax, realizing its prey was no longer fleeing, approached cautiously. Ben knelt in the sand and slowly extended one hand toward the creature. "Easy," he said softly, though he knew the beast could not understand his words. "I am not going to hurt you anymore." The creature stopped just out of arm's reach, its glowing eyes fixed on Ben's face. For a long moment, they remained motionless, predator and prey studying each other. Then Ben did something that made the entire arena gasp in amazement. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of food he had saved from his morning meal. He placed it on the sand between himself and the beast, then slowly backed away. The Korthax approached the offering cautiously, sniffed it, and then consumed it quickly. When it looked back at Ben, something in its posture had changed. The trial master's voice filled the arena, confusion evident in his tone. "The challenger appears to have pacified the beast rather than defeating it. This is not how the trial is typically completed." Queen Vega's voice cut across the arena, clear and commanding. "The trial requires that the beast be defeated, not destroyed. If the creature no longer poses a threat, then the trial has been completed successfully. Ben stood up slowly, his eyes still locked with those of the Korthax. The beast watched him for another moment, then turned and walked back toward the tunnel entrance, disappearing into the shadows from which it had emerged. The arena erupted in a sound unlike anything Ben had heard before. The Valerian spectators were not just applauding. They were cheering, their voices combining into a thunderous roar of approval that echoed off the crystal walls. Ben looked up at the royal box and saw Queen Vega standing, her 4 eyes bright with what he could only describe as respect. 2 trials completed. 1 trial remaining. The 3rd trial began at sunset. As the day's light faded over the Valerian capital, the great arena transformed into something entirely different. Arena workers had spent the afternoon constructing a detailed model city in the center of the space. The miniature buildings rose from the sand like a perfect replica of a real settlement, complete with residential areas, industrial zones, and defensive walls. Ben stood at the edge of this model city, studying the layout while the trial master explained the final challenge. Around him, holographic displays showed incoming enemy forces approaching from 3 different directions. The numbers were overwhelming. According to the simulation, Ben would have fewer than 2,000 defenders to protect a city of 50,000 civilians against an attacking force of 10,000 enemy soldiers. 3rd trial of worth, the trial master announced to the crowd. The challenger must coordinate the defense of the city against impossible odds. Traditional Valerian strategy calls for meeting the enemy in direct combat, using superior strength and warrior skill to defeat larger numbers through individual prowess. The challenger has 2 hours to prepare defenses and demonstrate leadership worthy of royal marriage. Queen Vega watched from her box as Ben began walking through the model city, examining each building and street. She had been quiet since his success in the 2nd trial, but her 4 eyes never left him. The way he had handled the Korthax beast had surprised her more than his solution to the boulder challenge. Any intelligent being might figure out how to use tools and leverage to move a heavy object, but choosing mercy over violence was something she had not expected from any challenger, regardless of species. Ben knelt beside one of the model buildings and began studying the holographic displays more carefully. The attacking forces were divided into 3 armies approaching from the north, east, and south. Each army was composed of different types of units with various strengths and weaknesses. The northern force was mostly heavy assault troops designed for breaking through fortified positions. The eastern army consisted primarily of fast-moving raiders meant to strike quickly and cause chaos. The southern force was a mixed group with siege equipment capable of destroying the city's walls from a distance. Most Valerian warriors who had taken this trial chose to concentrate their defenders at the strongest points and meet each attacking force with direct confrontation. It was the traditional way, the honorable way, and it usually resulted in saving about 60% of the civilian population while losing most of the defending forces. Ben stood up and walked to the command center that had been established at the model city's heart. Arena workers had provided him with communication equipment that would let him coordinate with simulated defending units throughout the city. He also had access to detailed information about available resources, from food supplies to building materials. For the first 30 minutes, Ben did something that confused many of the watching Valorians. Instead of positioning troops or planning battle strategies, he began reorganizing the civilian population. Using the communication system, he started moving people away from the outer districts and into the most defensible areas near the city center. He identified buildings that could serve as emergency shelters and began stockpiling supplies in secure locations. What is he doing? Ben heard one noble ask another in the royal box. Perhaps he is preparing to surrender the outer city without a fight, came the reply. That would save civilian lives but would be considered cowardice by our standards. Queen Vega said nothing, but Ben could feel her watching his every move. As the first hour passed, Ben began positioning his defending forces, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of concentrating troops at the walls to meet the enemy head-on, he spread them throughout the city in small groups. He positioned defenders in buildings that would give them advantages in height and cover. He set up supply lines that would let his forces move quickly from one area to another without being exposed to enemy fire. Most importantly, he began preparing what human military strategists would recognize as guerrilla warfare tactics. He identified which buildings could be safely demolished to block enemy advancement routes. He located all available materials that could be used to create obstacles and barriers. He even planned escape routes for civilian evacuation if certain areas became too dangerous to hold. The trial master looked confused as he monitored Ben's preparations. "This is unlike any defensive strategy we have seen before," he announced to the crowd. "The challenger appears to be preparing for retreat rather than victory." Ben ignored the comments and continued his work. As the second hour began, the simulated enemy forces started their attack. The northern assault force hit the city's main gates with exactly the kind of frontal attack that Valerian defenders traditionally prepared for. But instead of meeting them with mass troops, Ben's strategy scattered the attacking force. Small groups of defenders harassed the invaders from multiple directions, using hit-and-run tactics that made it impossible for the enemy to use their superior numbers effectively. When the northern force finally broke through the main gates, they found themselves in a maze of blocked streets and booby-trapped buildings. Ben had turned the city itself into a defensive weapon, using its layout to break up enemy formations and force them to fight in small groups where his outnumbered defenders had better chances. The Eastern raiders found their fast-moving attacks frustrated by similar tactics. Every time they thought they had found a clear route into the city, they discovered new obstacles that forced them to slow down and fight their way through defended positions. Ben's forces never tried to stop them completely in any single location, but the cumulative effect of dozens of small delays and minor battles wore down the raiders' momentum. The southern siege force found themselves facing the most unexpected challenge of all. Instead of trying to protect the city walls from their long-range weapons, Ben had prepared a counterattack that targeted the siege equipment itself. Small groups of defenders left the city under cover of darkness and struck at the siege weapons while the enemy was focused on their bombardment. Without their heavy equipment, the southern force was reduced to the same kind of street-by-street fighting that was wearing down the other attacking armies. As the simulation progressed, something remarkable became clear. Ben's unconventional strategy was working. His defending forces were taking much lighter casualties than traditional Valerian tactics would have produced. More importantly, the civilian population was remaining almost entirely safe in the secure areas where he had relocated them. But Queen Vega was not finished testing Ben. As the military simulation wound down with a clear victory for the defending forces, she stood up in the royal box. "Pause the trial," she commanded. The holographic displays froze, and the arena fell silent. Ben looked up at the Queen, wondering what was happening. Queen Vega descended from the royal box and walked across the arena to where Ben stood among the model buildings. Her massive form towered over him, and her 4 eyes studied him with an intensity that made him feel as though she was looking directly into his soul. "You have completed the 3 trials," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. "You have demonstrated cleverness in moving the sacred boulder. You have shown mercy and wisdom in your encounter with the Korthax beast. And you have proven strategic thinking in defending the city. But I have one final question for you, human." Ben straightened, meeting her gaze as steadily as he could. "Yes, Your Majesty. My daughter wishes to bind her life to yours, to join the royal family of the Valerian Empire to a member of your species. This decision affects not just her personal happiness, but the future of our people and our relationships with other worlds. So I ask you this, why should the Valorians trust humans? What can your people offer us that we cannot achieve through our own strength?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ben realized that this was the real test, the one that mattered more than all the physical trials he had just completed. Queen Vega was not just evaluating him as an individual. She was trying to understand whether an alliance with humanity would benefit her empire. Ben was quiet for a long moment, thinking carefully about his answer. When he spoke, his voice was calm but filled with conviction. "Your Majesty, the Valorians are among the most powerful people in this galaxy. Your strength and warrior culture have built an empire that spans dozens of star systems. You have achieved more through direct action and superior force than most civilizations accomplish in their entire history. He paused, looking around at the arena filled with Valerian spectators, then back at the Queen. But humans have something different to offer. We have survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally gifted. We survived because we learned to adapt, to cooperate, and to never give up no matter how impossible the odds seemed. Ben gestured toward the model city around them. In the trial just now, I did not try to match the enemy's strength with greater strength. Instead, I used strategy, cooperation, and the environment itself to turn our weaknesses into advantages. This is what humans do. We find ways to succeed even when logic says we should fail. Queen Vega's expression remained neutral, but Ben could see that she was listening intently. Your Majesty, if you form an alliance with humanity, you will not just gain access to our technology or our military support. You will gain access to our way of thinking. When the Valerian Empire faces a problem that cannot be solved through traditional strength, humans can offer alternative approaches. When your enemies expect you to respond with direct force, human advisors can help you surprise them with unexpected strategies. Ben took a deep breath and continued. But more than that, humans can teach your people about the strength that comes from diversity. In our history, our greatest achievements came not when we conquered each other, but when we learned to work together despite our differences. The same could be true for a partnership between our peoples. Queen Vega was quiet for several minutes, considering Ben's words. The entire arena waited in silence for her response. Finally, she spoke. You speak of cooperation and diversity, human. But what happens when cooperation fails? What happens when different peoples cannot find common ground? Ben smiled slightly. Then, Your Majesty, humans do what we have always done. We keep trying. We find new approaches. We refuse to accept that any problem is unsolvable or that any relationship is beyond repair. That persistence, that refusal to give up, is perhaps the most valuable thing we can offer your empire. Queen Vega studied Ben for another long moment. Then, slowly, she began to smile. It was the first time Ben had seen her truly smile since arriving on the Valerian homeworld. My daughter chose well, she said, her voice warm with approval. You have proven yourself worthy not just as an individual, but as a representative of your species. The Valerian Empire will be honored to welcome both you and humanity as allies. She turned to address the crowd in the arena. Let it be recorded that Ben Torres of Earth has successfully completed the trials of worth and has been accepted as a suitable mate for Princess Nira of the Valerian royal family. Furthermore, let it be recorded that the human species has proven itself worthy of friendship and alliance with our empire. The arena erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the crystal walls themselves. Ben felt his knees go weak with relief and exhaustion, but before he could collapse, Princess Nira was at his side, supporting him with her strong arms. Well done, my love, she whispered in his ear. You have given both our peoples a gift today. As the celebration continued around them, Ben looked up at Queen Vega, who was still smiling down at them both. Welcome to the family, Ben Torres, she said. I look forward to learning more about the strength of humans in the years to come. Ben realized that he had not just won the right to marry Princess Nira. He had opened a door between two civilizations, creating possibilities that neither could have achieved alone. And that, he thought, was exactly the kind of impossible thing that humans did best.